For those of us of a of a certain age, a common thing that many of us remember from our middle and high school days were lockers, or personalized storage spaces on a campus where students could safely keep their books and other possessions during the school day. But as a recent article in K-12 Dive notes, in modern times, the locker is becoming rarer and rarer on school campuses, a phenomenon that's only been hastened by the rise of digitized assessments, electronic textbooks, and the pandemic. And for many schools, lockers have faded away simply because students no longer demand them. As one high school principal in the article noted, students at his school are free to request a locker at the beginning of the year, but only about 100 of his students this year did. And as schools around the country remove lockers and new school constructions are more likely to be locker-free, the question now becomes, what do we do with this extra space? And some schools are using this additional square footage for more classroom and office space, which makes sense, but other schools are taking a different approach. At Spring Valley High School in South Carolina, the school is currently in the process, of removing rows of waist-high lockers in favor of creating collaborative spaces with modern furniture that can be used for students to do group projects. And in a way, Sarah, I would say Spring Valley's move is an attempt to preserve what people already commonly remember as a purpose of the school locker, which is a meeting place for students to connect with each other. So even as lockers are disappearing around us, perhaps the purpose of them are still remaining in some way. I feel like I might have been like one of the last people to use a locker, because I think at my high school, my year was like the last year before they put lockers away. We had these little, 12-inch by 12-inch lockers. You could barely fit a textbook into them, but we had them, and they were great for us. But now they're long gone. I mean, did you ever have a locker?
I think lockers were integrated into my one-room schoolhouse. Yes, once upon a time. Right around. No, of course.
Oh, come on now.
I did have lockers, and the students that I taught had lockers. But I would agree that they were not popular. They were, and I think if you just think about the logistics of why some of us needed lockers and the way our schools look today, let me ask you a question. What was in your locker, right? Probably your textbooks, probably a lot of notebooks, right? Maybe a change of clothes because we had, PE or something like that, and you had to change.
Sports equipment,
right?
Actually, for me, my theater costume. No
go,
locker belonging to Ryan Carella ever had sports equipment in it.
There you go. Yeah, no jousting equipment in there. It was just your theater stuff. Yeah. But if we think about just the landscape of what we needed, I can tell you, even by the time I became a teacher, fewer and fewer students had textbooks, right? They were not given textbooks to take home, which is something that we used to do. But why don't students take textbooks home anymore? Because they have an online textbook. Why don't students carry books from class to class? Because most of it is digitized, right? Why don't students carry multiple notebooks and folders? Because most of the schools are going one-to-one with devices after the pandemic, because that's what we used a lot of our funds for, right? Is to go to digitize things, because students weren't in school. They needed things digitally. So if we think about just logistically, the things that they carried are not there anymore, right? Yeah. They just aren't there. So, and then of course there are safety concerns. What are we doing with all of that space? It makes it very difficult for, educators and administrators specifically to manage all of that property. Things get lost, things get stolen, things are, and that becomes a big waste, unfortunately, of an educator's time. An administrator's time is looking for things that got put in the wrong locker or that got stolen from somebody's locker. So we're eliminating a bit of that hassle for administrators. And then something that you mentioned, which I know a lot of my schools have dealt with, is real estate. Real estate is expensive. So why are we spending our precious real estate on something that's not being utilized when we could use that space for so many other things?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, particularly with a lot of the schools that you're working with, Sarah, where these are schools of choice, and there's a strong demand for a lot of the schools you work in. And so space does become a premium. And I know there's always conversations happening on your campuses about where can we find an extra
Where do we
1,000
have?
square feet to get another
Yeah,
classroom
we
in
need
this
another
school.
classroom. We need another lab. We need
Yeah.
this. We need that. And so lockers become, if they were ever purchased, they become an expensive space taker and not really something that is furthering education.
Yeah. I think another thing that makes this topic interesting to me is how it aligns with pop culture. I haven't done any studies
Mm.
on this. I've never been to a school outside of the United States, but I think in a lot of ways the school locker is something of a unique American invention. I had
Hmm.
an old friend of mine who grew up in another country and then came to the United States for high school, and she told me that one of the things that she was most excited about in coming to the United States for high school was having her own locker, because she would watch TV shows like Degrassi or Saved by the Bell or something, and she would see that every kid would have these big, tall lockers and be like, "Oh, I'm going to get one of those when I come to the America for high school." So, and I think even today that pop culture meme still persists, even though
Mm.
like in the real world, lockers are becoming rarer and rarer. But if you watch a lot of TV shows today that are based in a high school, the kids still have lockers. Like that's still something they use because it's a useful plot device. So I think the myth of the locker will persist a lot longer than actual lockers in the actual schools we work in.
Well, I think part of that probably goes to, or probably stems from the fact that most of our high schools were built in a certain time and things don't change very often, right? And so, in the same way that it's expensive to onboard lockers, it can be expensive to uh,
Off
offboard.
board.
Is that the right
We'll
word?
take that.
Um,
It is now.
sure.
I like that.
It is with confidence, to dispose of them, right? So it's expensive to figure out how to have them removed. It is expensive to have them hopefully recycled or properly disposed of. And, I think a lot of administrators or maybe school districts, if your school was built in the 60s, if your school was built in the 70s or 80s, which is 40, 50, 60 years ago, um, leave well enough alone, right? And fix what you can, and that may not be a high priority. Um, the nerd in me wants to make sure that we correct things for accuracy's sake. Degrassi was in Canada, so it's not
Ah.
necessarily no, but it's a North American. It's definitely a North American trope. And
Oh,
when you were starting to talk about lockers, the first thing I thought of was Saved by the Bell,
yeah.
which is like maybe a product of our childhood. But I feel like, Disney Channel or Nickelodeon shows where everybody's in a high school, they have lockers. I
Yep.
agree. But it is interesting. It is an American thing. I would love to do more homework on the perpetuation of those kinds of things. I know there are some very American traditions that kind of have permeated into other cultures, like prom. Prom was something that was such an American thing that I did not realize was not a
Is that
a
right? Is prom just
worldwide.
something we do here? I
Well,
did not know
now
that.
it goes to other places, but it was definitely something that was kind of um movie-fied, it was made Hollywood, and as that came into other cultures, you see it in other countries now where they would say, "Oh, we thought that taking the whole limo to prom was just something you see in movies. We didn't know that Americans really did those things." And it's like, "No, this is really what people do in our culture, not everybody, obviously, but yeah, it's something that's just become a part of American culture. It's interesting how that's
That's a
popularized.
that's an interesting topic in and of itself, and maybe something we should delve into deeper are, you know, things about the American education experience that are just
Mhm.
normal for us that other countries are like, that's an interesting thing. That's only something you do. That's very strange.
Well, I
So,
mean, talking even about like the way this is something that comes up a lot in PD for educators is how in Japan they don't have custodians, right? So we spend a lot of money on custodial staff, a lot of money on custodial staff. And so this is constantly, they share videos all the time about how custodial staff is not needed because of the culture that the
yeah, the
students
students clean.
clean up. They clean up after themselves. And so that is something that is just part of the culture. And so it's really interesting when we start thinking about how we spend our money as educators versus how other cultures spend money and why.